What was your tuition back then?
My tuition when I entered college was $120. Room, board, and tuition for a semester was $570. I actually received a Phillips scholarship for my freshman year. And you look back now, it was $50. And you think, oh my gosh, $50, you can't buy a book for that today. That's true. But not that kids buy books anymore, but it actually paid for half my tuition. And then I worked the summers and actually earned enough money, getting paid, I think, $1.80 an hour, but I earned enough to basically pay for my way through school.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to my Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 184. I've got Robin Capehart, who is a two-time college professor or college president in West Virginia, and he also is from my high school. But and he's also done some academic consulting and he's actually done a lot of different things. He's definitely worn many hats. He's been in the governor's cabinet and done a lot of things. We're going to talk about the state of academia and how it got that way. How are you, Robin?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. You graduated high school from John Marshall High School in 1971 with my oldest brother. And,
right.
And so you entered college soon after that, I assume. And
in the fall. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've obviously seen a whole lot of changes since that time. I got to ask, first of all, what was your tuition back then?
My tuition when I entered college was $120. Room, board, and tuition for a semester was $570. I actually received a Phillips scholarship for my freshman year. And you look back now, it was $50. And you think, oh my gosh, $50, you can't buy a book for that today. That's true. But not that kids buy books anymore, but it actually paid for half my tuition. And then I worked the summers and actually earned enough money, getting paid, I think, $1.80 an hour, but I earned enough to basically pay for my way through school. And so, and when my last year of law school, which was 1978, my tuition for law school that year was, I think, $205, something like that. It was just a little
semester.
Yeah. That was law school. That was professional school.
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't sure if grad school, made that much of a difference. So obviously you've seen other change, Robin, too. I got to ask you also, what's the difference between a college and a university?
Your letterhead. I mean, there's private colleges. Private colleges could become universities just by changing their letterhead. I think if you look at technically, a university probably has different schools in it, which means it has different fields of study that are kind of distinct and stand alone. Now, if you're a public school, though, in West Virginia, they do require you to meet certain standards. Yeah. For example, you have to have 2/3 of your faculty have to have terminal degrees in their field, which means their degree is as far as they can go in a particular field. Usually, you usually have to be a university before you offer a master's degree. But so, and one of the reasons when I was, of course, there, when they back in the early 2000s in West Virginia, they made a lot of the colleges universities, like Concord and places like that. The ones that were left out were West Liberty, Bluefield State, and Glenville. Well, I've been the president of 2 of them.
Yeah.
And we took them to become universities. And it does because of the qualifications of your faculty, it does elevate your stature some. But I'll tell you the big reason to become a university was, especially when we were at West Liberty, was it attracts international students. If you're internationally, for example, you go to Europe, In Europe, a college is, I'm going to kind of hit or miss on this, but it's kind of a trade school. You know, it's not where you go to get some kind of, deep, deep knowledge of anything. It's not what you would think of as a university. So, and they have that predisposition to avoid colleges in this country because they think they're going to be something like what colleges are overseas. But the university is the ultimate. That's where you want to go. But I know of I know of a lot of colleges in West Virginia, private colleges that just became a university by changing their letterhead, just changing their name. And quite frankly, most of them do offer master's degrees. And that used to be the defining point, was whether you could offer a master's degree or not.
Okay. Yeah. So what was the, what was the state back in the 70s? Because it seems like this was when things were starting to get, radicalized to where it's the woke takeover now. And first of all, has the wokeness taken over everything, or is this just something we're seeing at the Ivy League?
Now that's too good. No, it's pretty deep into a lot of schools, but it's not. Matter of fact, I think answering your first question will probably help answering the second question. When I went to school in 1971, I had some really good professors. I mean, I had Bob DeClerico was a great professor, and I was in political science, and as political as those courses were, I couldn't tell you the political or philosophical leanings of any of those professors, with the exception of one, Dr. Whisker, who was my advisor, who was unabashedly conservative. He was really conservative. I mean, no bones about it. He taught political philosophy. But as far as the rest of them go, I think one of the professors I had, we saw that he had spoke to some Democrat group somewhere. So you kind of assume that. But when you got into the classroom, what they focused on was making you think. They focused on you acquiring knowledge, creating premises, doing critical thinking, solving problems, those types of things, and developing those skills along the line with picking up some content as you went along. I actually found in a bookstore one of my poli-sci one, and I recognize it, my poli-sci, and you go back and look at it, and it was really kind of vanilla. It really wasn't. It didn't lean one way or the other. But if you go back, and then I remember when I know a guy that started college back about 10 years ago, and they used Howard Zinn's book. This was supposed to be a political science class or history class.
Yeah.
And Howard Zinn's book was just so left wing, so progressive. And so, if you want to teach that way, okay, that's fine. It's your college. Kind of do what you want. That's up to you. But back then, I really felt like we got a better education because we were developing these skills that we were going to use throughout our lives. Somewhere probably in the late 70s, early 80s, things started to change. There's a really good book, and I wish I could remember the name of it. But there's a really good book out that talking about part of what are the problems with college. One of the things this book pointed out, it doesn't do your viewers any good if I just keep saying this book, but that's what it is. One of these things this book pointed out was that what's happened over the years is that college professors who are very influential in hiring other college professors, faculty hiring other faculty, tended to start hiring people who were more aligned with their political view than whether or not they had this capability to teach these cognitive problem-solving, critical thinking skills to their students. And this did happen over the years. Of course, we still, higher education today, for the most part, still holds on to a 12th century business model. I mean, that's what runs the colleges right now, is a 12th century business model, in which faculty still have extreme say over, who the faculty. So, like I said, they just hired people that were kind of like them, and so what happened is over the years, instead of teaching students how to think, we started teaching students what to think. And that's where a lot of I think that's kind of where we've come to today. Now, when you talk about, are all colleges this way, or is it with the Ivy League? I think it's particularly bad in the Ivy Leagues, simply because this idea of, hiring professors that think like you, these are like really smart people that hire really smart people that think like them. So it kind of, it elevates it a little bit. But I think as far as the school, you got to kind of break down the school, Chris. When you look at a school, so when you think about all school, for example, when I was at Bluefield State, our three dominant fields of study were engineering, health sciences, and business. Well, engineering is, measure twice, cut once. It's math. It's physics. It's those types of things. You don't really see here a lot of you don't really see a lot of political talk coming out of STEM classes, because what they're teaching is that they're preparing students to go into a specific field of study. Where you find the wokeness is mostly in the liberal arts, because there the classes are more conducive to trying to teach students what to think as opposed to how to think. You're not going to, your nurses are not going to pass the nursing exam if they don't know how to think. And that's why it's extremely important there. So that's kind of the transition I've seen since I've been in school.
Yeah, I don't know if it's, you talked about some books. I got a list of some books here that I'm thinking of. Alan Bloom, The Closing of the American Mind. Mm-hmm. That was in 1987. Against Deconstruction by John M. Ellis. Tenured Radicals by Roger Kimball. I don't know, Thomas Sowell had a book called Inside American Education. These were all written in the late 80s, early 90s. Mm-hmm. So I know I read some, and there was another book around then called Imposters in the Temple by Martin Anderson. There were people already who were blowing the whistle on this back then, but the things they said were completely ignored. And it's only gotten a lot worse since then. But, I know John M. Ellis said another problem was that between 65 and 75, you had a doubling of enrollment. So you had to also hire new professors, and they possibly lowered their standards to hire these new professors. And that's how that created a space for ideologues to come in.
Well, that's a great point. And what we're seeing now, a lot of it is the aging of the ideologues from the 60s and 70s, who quite frankly didn't really have any place else to go. They either went to government or they went into academia. Yeah. They weren't going to go into business. That's where we've kind of seen that's where I've kind of seen the transition over the years.
Well, and hasn't there also been, more, a proliferation of what we'd even call these political degrees, like, women's studies, for example, which, and talk about science, I mean, one of the least popular places for Karl Marx is economics departments. I mean,
right. Well, economics is kind of an interesting field of study, because what happens is to teach economics, you hire people with economics degrees, and people with economics degrees teach what they know. And that means they teach, you're going to see a lot of graphs with a lot of curves and, and all that kind of thing, which is the economics I have. But the economics that needs to be taught is the economics that it was contained in a book called Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, where he discusses economics more as a social science than a math exercise. And so, but what you've got is you don't really have people that have degrees in that type of economics. Usually when you get a degree in economics, you're learning the economic theory and you're learning, your monetary policy, you're learning that kind of stuff, but it's more, it just seems to be more math oriented. But if you read Thomas Sowell's book by Basic Economics, it would be an outstanding textbook, but the economics professors won't adopt it because that's not what they were taught. You know, they were taught a different way. So, you know, you mentioned one thing that prompted my mind. You know, Chris, all colleges were created for a purpose.
Yeah.
And the purpose was determined by the creators of the college. And if you go back and just look at, you can kind of paint with a broad brush the reason some colleges were created. For example, I've taught at 2 regional public institutions. They were created to fill those institutions were created to fill a specific economic need. The creators, which at that time were the state legislature, they determined that, number one, we've got this growing mandate that all kids have to go to school. We need school teachers. So most of these, I think all of our regional institutions came out of being teachers' colleges. I also was the president of an historically Black college. When you go back and look at why the creators created historically Black colleges, was because not only for teachers, that was a reason. There was a growth of institutions for African Americans at that point, but also it was for the trades. You know, if you were a young man, you wanted to be a carpenter, you wanted to be an electrician or something like that. You had to study under someone. Well, you had white tradesmen that wouldn't bring in an African American. Probably afraid to hurt their business. So that's where the HBCU stepped in. And to this day, about 25%, and from that grew engineering programs. That's why you see a lot of HBCUs have engineering programs, because they grew out of that trade. My point being, I think there's coming a time where I think obviously the creators of most colleges are gone, but the stewardship of those colleges have been handed down through their boards of governors or their boards of trustees. That's the stewardship that gets passed down. And I think at some time they've got to sit down and they've got to go back and look at why do we exist? What was the thought as to why we exist? Now, you may want to change it. I read an article. This was kind of an interesting article. I got an article here out Inside Higher Ed, and it's from a guy named Stephen Mintz, who's a very bright man. I think he's a professor at Texas A&M. I don't agree with him on some things, but he talks about, read it. He talks about the true purpose of a college education. And he cites a study in here. He cites a study from Lumina, which does a lot of studies. It says, according to the survey, most students attend college in order to qualify for a good job, be successful at work, make money, learn new things, and grow as a person. This is his opinion. I consider this a rather impoverished understanding of the purposes of a college education. Mm-hmm. In other words, going to college and getting a job is not what he thinks a college education is. And he goes on to talk about this transition from into adulthood, and that's what college is, and that's the real purpose, is to help students, transition themselves through into adulthood. Let me tell you what, when I walked out the door and I was 18 years old and went to college, I was an adult. I was told, you're an adult now. But anyway, so now you know what? There may be a college who feels like that really is their purpose. Fine. Go ahead. Let that be your purpose. Put that in your advertisements. Put that on your billboards. And then we'll let the market determine whether or not there's a market for that type of college. But the fact is that somewhere along the line, we've kind of drifted away from what the original purpose. The original purpose, as I said, is public regional institutions was to meet the economic needs of the community. And right now we're sitting here with we need nurses, we need a lot of healthcare providers, we need a lot of engineers, we need a lot of people in math, we need science teachers. There's a lot of things we need, but yet we have some kind of policies, but we don't really have a focused effort on in incentivizing the college to produce those types of students. Part of the problem too is there's not students that want to go into it. That's part of the problem too.
Well, as you pointed out, and Bluefield State's a very interesting case because Bluefield, after desegregation, turned white.
Mm-hmm.
I've always been intrigued. West Virginia stayed with the North, or became a state because it wanted to be with the North, but somehow we still got caught up in all the Jim Crow nonsense anyway. But that's another discussion.
Here's what happened with Bluefield State.
Yeah,
Mercer County has the highest African American population in West Virginia for a county. The city of Bluefield has the highest of any city.
Yeah.
And if you look at what used to be, there was a time when McDowell County had 100,000 people.
Oh yeah, it was the third largest county by population.
Huge African American population.
Yeah.
Well, here's what happened. Bluefield State did their job. They took these African American kids from McDowell County and some of the surrounding areas. They educated them, and then they moved. They didn't go back to McDowell County. They didn't stay in Mercer County. They went to Charlotte. They went to North Carolina. They went to Columbus, Cleveland. So they kind of went away. And so what happened was there was a change that came. There was a change that came about after the Second World War. If you go back, the tipping point was around 1968. The 60s, you just saw this drift, but you also saw a steady decline in the pool of African American students that would be available. When I got there in 2019, we were probably somewhere between 4% and 6% African American, and quite frankly, it was mostly athletes. When I left after 5 years, we were at 30% because we made an effort to go out and find really good. And now we had a lot of sports, which helped also. But I don't want to think it was just the sports that brought them. I think the sports, the academic opportunities we provided helped those students make their decisions about where they wanted to go play their sport. Excuse me.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a very interesting story. So yeah. So and did you go to WV, West Virginia University, or where'd you go after you graduated high school?
I crammed 4 years into 7 at WVU.
Okay. Yeah.
No, I went 4 years undergraduate and 3 years.
Yeah. And WVU never really got wrapped up in all the radicalism or anything like that, was there? I mean, it was always pretty just mainstream,
Yeah, there was a demonstration, I think, the year before I got there. The biggest crowd I ever saw in front of the Mountain Lair was in 1976, and that's because we had a streaker running through.
Oh, geez.
Yeah. That's what drew a big crowd. No, we really didn't have that. We didn't. You got to consider where a lot of these students from WVU came from. First of all, you got to realize, once again, a lot of them were coming there to go into specific professions. They were coming to go into engineering. They were coming to go into accounting. They were coming to go into business. They were coming to go. They had these specific areas. It wasn't a liberal arts college. It was a pre-professional college to a great extent. And if you look at where, you ask about the Ivy Leagues, really the problem you're finding is at the liberal arts colleges because they're more susceptible to it because they have faculties whose area of interest, seem to lean more toward that. Like I said, you get a math teacher, math is math. When you teach your kids math, it's pretty cut and dry. Although now it sounds like they're starting to say that 2 + 2 is something other than just 2 + 2. So.
Well, that's part of the problem here is now we're seeing this creep into other areas. We're now seeing it. I mean, it's. I don't know if it's creeped necessarily in computer science departments, but it's definitely something. It's definitely something that's showing in Silicon Valley now. And not to mention, medical and biology, we now have a situation where, it used to be, if you were born with 2 X chromosomes, you were a woman, and you were born with XY, you were a man. But now it's They're trying to corrupt that. So I don't know where we are.
I think what's happened with a lot of the wealthy is the growth of government.
Yeah.
Has induced a lot of wealthy people to become reliant upon or have a growing concern about government regulation, government contracts. When you talk about Silicon Valley, just think of the government contracts they have. And so, so when you start worrying about government, as we talked about earlier, and government is dominated by people who like government, then that normally leans more toward the progressive side than the conservative side. And then I think what you've got people in all industries having, look, everybody wants to be the friend of the regulator, and if you're going to be the friend of the regulator, it doesn't mean you're going to probably oppose them because they have too much discretion. And I think the growth of government has done more to change the philosophical leanings of a lot of big corporations.
That's possible, and certainly when you have various hiring quotas, especially applied to all this student aid. I mean, there's you have those few colleges like Hillsdale and Grove City that say we don't take any federal money. We don't even take people who are and they can't even take it indirectly, so they figure out other ways around that.
If I can just go, you raise a really good point here. Look, most of the times, if money's not the issue, there is no issue. And where you find, to me, the Trojan horse in higher education, as far as infusing some type of specific political leaning or message, I think is the accreditors. Because the accreditors, they're kind of they're not elected. Most of the time, I don't even think they're they're not even government employees. They're these nonprofits that have been, knighted by the federal government to say, you go in and find out whether these colleges are doing well or not. And if you say they're okay, we'll let them use government money. We'll let them have Pell Grants and Perkins loans or whatever they use now. And so, I mean, that's been my experience. I have a friend of mine who teaches in education, and we were going and we were just having a talk one time, and a lot of the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff was being required to be taught by the education departments in order to achieve accreditation. Well, sometimes I think college professors take too much of a beating in some areas. Some places they deserve it, but some places. But when the accreditors come in and say, and you have so many colleges that are dependent upon federal money now. They're dependent upon Pell money. They're dependent upon Pell loans.
Yeah.
An HBCU, we were dependent upon Title III money. That if you don't do it, you can't participate in that federal money. And so I went back and looked at the accrediting agency and this who ran this accrediting agency for teachers. And it was a lady. It was an Obama appointment, and the lady had been the former president of a community college. Well, they don't even have education programs at community college, but yet she was the one that was the head of this nonprofit, kind of misty, operating in the shadows accreditor, who was basically telling the teachers of teachers what they had to teach.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who have power, and they really don't have much in the way of accountability with what they're
exactly.
But Robin, isn't it also true that from when you first entered college in 1971, there's also been this massive growth of just bloat on the colleges as well. I mean, a college they might not have had any increase in the number of students, but they've got a lot more people working at the college.
Yeah. Well, That's true. Of course, I think you can probably find that in business, and you can find.
Because I mean, where does all this tuition money go? You know, it's got to go someplace.
Here's been part of the problem is that there's a book called there's a real good book called The Cost of College, and there's two things I want to point out. You know, you talked about the growth of administration. A great deal. Now, this isn't true necessarily on our campus, but on the bigger campuses that have more federal money, more research money, a lot of it is because the regulation at a lot of bigger universities has become so big. Some people has to file all these reports. Someone has to be hired to put all this stuff together. And so a lot of it is just, it's like if you're running a regular business, you know, if you're a shoe store, it's not much of a problem. But if you're running a chemical plant with all of the health and safety regulations and things like that, you've got to hire people to make sure that you're in compliance. I think that's where a lot of it had come. But to get back to, I hope I haven't forgot the second. But to get back to the second part of that about, you know, it kind of amuses me to hear people talk about, well, how comes college tuition has gone up, 15%, and the cost of living's only gone up 3%. It's because you don't run colleges with eggs and milk. You run colleges with highly degreed individuals, and that's where the cost has come. We actually, what you have now is you have people coming out of college. And once again, a lot of this comes back to accreditation. And I'm also one of those people that believes that I don't really need a PhD in English to teach English composition. Just give me a really good high school teacher that can teach grammar. That's the person I want. But the accreditors, once again, require you to have so many terminally degreed people. To go out and hire terminally degreed people is very expensive. That cost has gone up considerably because there's fewer and fewer of them. Part of the reason there's fewer and fewer of them, a lot of people aren't going into it. But also what you've got is you've got an increased competition with the private sector for hiring these highly qualified people. And that drives the price up. Let me give you an example. Try to find nursing faculty right now. Most colleges can pay $80,000, $90,000 for nursing faculty, and they can walk into a hospital and work pretty much whatever hours they want because they're in such demand, and make $40,000, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 more than that, plus get a bonus.
Yes, exactly.
But you also see it with people in math. You see it with people in chemistry. You know, the areas that you really need, you're in competition, not with just other colleges, which you are, but you're also in competition with the private sector. And so what that competition is doing is it's driving up the cost of these highly qualified potential faculty members who have PhDs and other types of doctorates. So when we see tuition, look, a college is about 80% labor costs. It's about 80% labor costs. And if you look at the percentage of your, you know, like when I think of both schools where I was president, it was about half and half. We had, 50% faculty and 50% administration and staff. So let's go there. But the cost of those faculty was increasing a lot quicker than the cost of the guy that cut the grass. Or the cost of the clerk that filed, that kept track of the grades of someone. Those costs were going up higher. And that's why we've seen these costs go up. And you also have on the other side, Chris, you have this pressure not to raise tuition. I really know college presidents that their best day of the year, and it was the best press they ever got, was when they went to the newspaper and they said, we're not raising tuition this year. Fine. Okay. Now you don't have any money to hire faculty. And by the way, I'm talking about when you want to hire good faculty, it's expensive.
I remember several years ago there was that case where Bethany, which of course is also close to where we grew up in, which is still a college, but they announced like we're cutting all tuition by like 1/3 or something. And of course, then after that said, well, we won't have to put as much money into scholarships and all this other stuff because they. Do you remember that?
Oh yeah, but see that's what I remember. University of Charleston did it too.
Yeah.
Here's the fact: when you see the posted tuition for most smaller liberal arts college, nobody pays that. Nobody pays that. And they'll call it when they say we're not putting money into scholarships. Chris, there's no cash. It's just a discount. Yeah. You know, it's like it's why the airlines discount the last seat on the plane, because they're not going to get 600 because the plane leaves in a half an hour, but they might get 200, and they're so we'll sell it for that. And so that's what colleges does. The discount rate in this country has grown so rapidly, especially among private liberal arts colleges. It's well over 50%. Colleges and universities that both you and I know are well into 2/3 of the discount. So you might see a published rate of $30,000. Nobody's paying more than 10 because they give, quote, a scholarship and they discount it. So what happened at Bethany is what happened probably at a lot of other colleges, that they looked and said, hey, look, our I don't know what their tuition was, but let's say it was 30,000, probably a little higher. No one's paying 30. Most people are paying 20. Let's just say we're going to cut tuition to $20,000. It'll be good press. People, make people feel good about what we're trying to do. But the fact of the matter is, they weren't really losing money. It was just money they weren't getting anyway. And I'll tell you the reason, Chris. It's the same thing with athletics. My kid's getting a $2,000 scholarship to go to X private liberal arts college to play basketball. He's not getting it. There's no cash. He's getting a discount. But Chris, nobody likes to go to the bowling alley and say, hey, my kid just got a discount to college. No, my kid got a scholarship to college.
Yes.
And that makes it seem, that makes it a lot more palatable. So they posture it under, but nobody pays it.
Yeah, the word scholarship does have a little more glamour to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, you were talking about, what is our purpose? So it is interesting to see how some colleges have, because are no longer on the same purpose, because Harvard was started as a college to train priests.
Exactly. Once again, you can make the argument that every college was started to fill some type of economic need. Harvard was started because you had these these priests or the ministers that came over, and they were getting older, and they really didn't have anybody to train because there wasn't a lot of people there. That's why Harvard was started, was to train people for the priesthood. Now, I'm not saying, or not priesthood, but just to be a pastor. I'm not saying that that Harvard would go back to just training pastors.
Yeah.
But look at it in a broader sense. You've got to figure out what the economic need is. That's what you need to be training people for. Most of these private liberal arts colleges, especially the ones that have an affiliation, most of those colleges, Chris, were formed because there were businessmen who were wealthy. There was only two types of people that went to these colleges. You either were really, really smart, or your family was well-to-do.
Yeah.
And they wanted their son or daughter. I hate to say it, but it was mostly sons back then. They wanted their sons to be not only just prepared with different skills, but they also wanted them to be virtuous. They felt that was part of the development, is for them to become a virtuous individual. And that's why a lot of these religious colleges were created. And some of them have gone so far away from that, and it's hurt them. I mean, I know colleges with religious affiliations that, first of all, a lot of them, the denomination was declining, you know, as we see more and more people going to, you know, non-traditional churches, but the denomination started declining. And also what they did was they realized we're not going to just be able to get kids that want to, you know, be a good Methodist. We need the, you know, we can't support the school with just kids that want to be a good Methodist. So a lot of them started relaxing those type of requirements, just the same as so many colleges have relaxed academic requirements. You know, I sat around, I went to lunch with groups of faculty regularly at both colleges, and overwhelmed. I would always ask them, do you know of anybody that basically dumbs down their academic requirements just so kids can get through their class? They were very, yeah, I can tell you exactly who it is. I can tell you exactly 3 or 4 of them. Now, it's interesting that most of that took place in disciplines where, let me just say, put it the other way. Most of that did not take place in disciplines where that graduate had to take a test to get a license.
Yeah.
You don't dumb down nursing. You don't dumb down rad tech. You don't, you know, and in other schools, you don't dumb down med school. You don't dumb down, you know, well, I guess you could dumb down law school. But anyway, but you see this decline in academic, a stringent academic standard.
Yeah. Well, you know, another thing too is, you mentioned, you know, why do people go to college? I think another reason, you know, is to just, that's where you can really start building a network. I mean,
right.
I remember a study that I don't have a link to the article, but if you join a fraternity, your GPA will drop on average by 0.25. But if you're also a member of a fraternity, you'll make like 34% more in your lifetime.
Yeah.
Because, you know, it's, you know, 20 years later, you lose your, you know, maybe you get laid off from your job and you call up your fraternity brother, says, hey, I just got laid off. And your fraternity brother, oh, hey, we need somebody. So there you go. And you know,
I think I wasn't in a fraternity because I would in the 70s. It was not a good time to be in fraternities. But I think the point you're making is that college is a great place to build these relationships.
Yes, exactly.
And I can basically I bet you I can trace back every job I've had, and as you pointed out, I have trouble keeping a job, going from one thing to the other.
Well, I didn't say that, but yeah,
I'm just kidding. I know that. Yeah. That my friends always kidded me. They said, you don't change jobs, you change careers. But when I go back, I can almost take something back to WVU. I can take it back to WVU. But you know, you mentioned about the reason people go to college, especially since COVID. We've got 2 trends in this country right now that are 3 trends that are working against colleges right now when it comes to enrollment. Number one, all of the riots and all of the tents and all of the speaking out in favor of Hamas, that's not helping colleges. That's not helping any college, even though it doesn't college. It's reinvigorating a general perception about college that parents and even students don't want to go. I don't want to go. I don't want to go to a college that's going to be more worried about this. I want to go to college where, as that survey I told you a while ago pointed out, where I can gain the skills to get a job. So that's one trend that's working. The second is what's called the enrollment cliff. The enrollment cliff came about from a sudden decline in births in this country that took place about 16, 17 years ago. And we've seen this steady decline in enrollment since that time. And we're supposed to hit this enrollment cliff in about 2 years, and then it's just going to fall off. And we're going to have real trouble, so there's just not enough students. But I think the third thing that I think gets a little underplayed in academia, but needs to be played up more, parents and students and even employers are starting to really question the value of a college education. You've seen massive numbers of employers completely get rid of the requirement that you have a college degree before we'll interview. I mean, I think the governor in Pennsylvania eliminated 46,000 jobs that he eliminated the need for a college degree. And so, that's just a testament to the fact that people are starting to question whether or not a college degree is worthwhile or not.
Well, it was that way really back in the 40s and 50s too, though, that a lot of these same positions didn't require a college degree because there just weren't that many students out there. And not to mention,
I'll address that historically, because I think it was in the late 60s and early 70s where this requirement for a college degree began to pop up. What they found out was that if you were interviewing a minority, and not just African Americans, but it could be, women or anything that was considered a protected class, what they would do is, if you would interview and not hire a member of a protected class, there were constant lawsuits. There were constant, there's constant problems with that. And that's when employers started putting in there, you have to have a college degree, because they knew that the numbers within those protective classes that had college degrees were a lot less, and it gave them something to weed kids out.
Yeah,
that's when that requirement came in. But you're right. You go back even into the 50s, you didn't need a college degree to do a lot of things. Yeah.
Well, also, they also outlawed, IQ tests and stuff like that. Which I thought was kind of ridiculous. It is very interesting because and also, the pedigree of the Ivy League is just shot now. I mean, who was that? The guy said, "I'm not going to hire Columbia law students." Or I've heard Peter Thiel that Peter Thiel does not hire Harvard. Period. Who knows where that goes now? It's
well, and it's the money. That's what's always amazed me is how many of these, how many of these traditional conservatives were giving money to these schools when the product was fairly obvious.
That's the thing. And a lot of these, people who have lots of money didn't really take notice until after October 7th last year.
Right.
And some people pointed out, not to mention, Robin, you also got to look, at the complete demonization of white males. I mean, that's been going on for years, and I don't know also how much, it makes a difference, is the culture of false accusations.
Yeah.
College is a place where a lot of, young men and young women interact. The woman says one thing, the man says another thing, and they almost always side with the woman.
Mm-hmm.
And that's certainly, and I think that's radicalizing a whole lot of men, and they're just going into trades or whatever. You can look at Duke lacrosse, mattress girl.
Yeah. Well, of course, obviously the 24-hour news cycle has contributed to a lot of that stuff. You wouldn't have probably even heard much about.
I bet when you started at WVU, co-ed dorms were not a thing. In fact, you probably had, one tower for the men, one tower for the women, and the women, and you couldn't even go into the other towers.
No, you couldn't. No, they had some visiting hours.
Yeah.
And the visiting hours were constructed not for guys, but they were constructed so that the fathers could help their daughters carry luggage down and do things like that. I was an RA for 2 years, and we had and what you found was, first of all, you found a lot of honestly females liked it that way, and they liked to be able to kind of run around their floors and stuff, and not worry about some guy popping out of nowhere. So we had visiting hours. They started out my freshman year. I think they were only on Sundays for like 4 or 5 hours or something like that. Then they expanded, and I think by the time I left, there was still co-ed dorms by the time I left. I mean, there wasn't any of this down the hall type of thing.
Yeah, and as you pointed out, it might be some case, where fathers or the brothers help them load luggage. You know,
yeah, that was part of the problem and stuff. And,
yeah, you know, and it did create a safe space, you know, because you know sometimes I was young. You can sometimes a guy will be act kind of stupid and says, well, here's a place where I can get away from the guy, and he, you know,
exactly, yeah,
and he knows that too, you know. So
well, back then too, we weren't concerned about the students as much as we were the parents, because the last thing we wanted was some parent to say, my daughter called and said she saw this guy wandering around up there, you know, and
yeah, the parents, yeah, which is why, you know, a lot of parents will still say, you stay in the dorm your first year, you know.
Well, back then you used to have to. Matter of fact, when my sister was 2 years older than me, but she left college and then I came in the next year. When my sister was in college, which would have been, she went in 1969 to 71. All women on campus had to live in a dorm or what was called university approved housing. And university approved housing, there was a couple of private dorms or sorority houses, and that's it. Yeah. You couldn't live in an apartment. If you got married or something like, or you were in graduate school, that's when you got an apartment. But for the most part, they had to live in dorms. And I don't want to sound like an old timer, an old geezer and things like that, but you know, it was a simpler time.
Yeah, it was a simpler time in some ways. I don't, you know, obviously you didn't have the internet and you had regular phones, and it was
there's some places you had a phone in the hallway. You didn't have one. Now, I lived in the towers. We were real uppity because we had phones in our rooms. That was kind of a big deal.
Yeah, sometimes they didn't. Yeah, sometimes they wouldn't even have phones in the room. Like you might have 4 rooms that share one phone or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and you know another thing too that changed, Robin. You know, back when you went to college, most incoming freshmen had shared a bedroom. It's not that now.
Oh, I know.
College, they've never had to share a bedroom with anybody.
You know, we had an interesting situation at Bluefield State in that we brought back housing for the first time since 1968. In 1968, there was campus housing. Yeah. There was a bombing on campus that made national news. The president at that time used that as an opportunity to close down housing. I honestly think it was a racist move. I think because the dorms were dominated by African American students coming from outside the area.
Yeah.
And I think he saw it as a way to cut that down. I really do. And so they hadn't had housing since 1968. Well, we brought back campus housing. And by the way, we were in one facility. We basically had got access to the old Bluefield Regional Hospital, which was getting ready to close. And so we converted their rooms into dorm rooms, but we had men's floor and women's floors.
Yeah.
You know, and sometimes that financially creates a problem because, you know, we had more women than men. So we had men rooms that were empty, but we had women wanting rooms. So, you know, you kind of have to adjust, but we kept them separated by floor. It didn't stop the problems, but we still had problems.
Years ago, I visited a friend at Whitman College in southeastern Washington, and he was actually in a dorm which was also a converted hospital.
Mm-hmm.
And the one thing that was really wild about it is that, you know, you had these doors that were 4 feet wide.
Yeah, the doors were real wide. Yeah,
which is
it was so you could get the beds in and out.
Yeah, so you get the beds in and out. Yeah, it's just but that was in Whitman College.
I stayed at the Quality. I don't know if it's still there, but I stayed at the Quality Inn in Elkins one time, and it was a converted hospital, and the doors were,
I can imagine it.
Not wide.
Yeah, I remember Whitman's most famous alumni was Judge William O. Douglas. That was one person they had who has a claim to fame, who was, of course, the longest tenure ever on the Supreme Court. But I got to ask too, as the quality of the students went down since, where do you put the blame for that? I mean, and
I just don't think. Well, you know, I just don't think kids are coming out of high school prepared. I think a lot of it, and I don't necessarily put the blame on, I don't put blame on the high, a lot of them, it's just, there's just no one's going into education anymore. You know, no one's going into education. I mean, I saw a really interesting statistic one time.
Yeah.
In West Virginia, there's 15,000 teachers. 5,000 of them, Chris, are married to each other. And you can think of John Marshall, teachers that were married to each other. Yes. The reason I mention that is because only by those two teachers combining their salaries, you know, did they make what a decent enough salary that they, you know, which they wanted to live. And I think that's had a big problem. The kids aren't coming out prepared, number one. Another thing too is I think the colleges in many respects are willing enablers on some of this. And let me explain that. There was a book come out called Academically Adrift, and it came out in 2011, and it was a survey done by a group called the Council for Aid to Education. And what it talked about was what's called the art of college management. And the art of college management means, as opposed to the old days where, like you take early HBCUs, kids went to school because they wanted to learn. Now kids go to college to get a degree, and they're two separate things. And what the art of college management is, okay, I'm a freshman. I want to get a degree. What's the easiest, quickest, simplest route for me to get from here to there? And I'll tell you why I know a lot about this, Chris, because quite frankly, that was me. That was me. I look back on my college career. I had a couple of professors that I really enjoyed. I loved learning in their class. But I found myself taking classes that, I'll take this guy, he gives 2/3 A's. I remember taking a linguistics class from a wonderful man named Dr. Borsay. Wonderful guy. To this day, I can't even tell you what the class was about, but I got an A in it because all I wanted to do when I went to school, when I went to undergraduate schools, I wanted to be a lawyer. And what happened was that bachelor's degree was something I had to get past to get into law school and become a lawyer. And I think a lot of people today are just, you know, that's all they want is a degree. And I find colleges and universities, they're so starved for students because they need the tuition money that they're willing to basically lower academic standards to keep that kid in school. And all that does is water down a college degree. And so I think when it's our kids, when I graduated from John Marshall, Chris, 1971, we had 438 students in our graduating. Yep. We had only about 100 went to college, and that's a low number. Then you come along and you see, Obama says 50% of our people need a college degree. It's all about getting a college degree. No, it's not about getting a college degree, Chris. It's about learning. It's about learning. And to me, where we've fallen short is that we do not hold colleges accountable for learning. Are your students actually learning? Now, that's kind of a broad statement. Yeah. There's some areas that you are held accountable. If you have a nursing program and you don't get a certain number of your students passing the licensure exam, you're going to be in trouble. It's the same thing we had radiology technology. Anything that requires licensing, what you find is normally a better student, a more focused faculty, and students who learn. But see, we don't have that in a lot of other places.
Yeah.
We don't have that everywhere. We don't have that kind of accountability. And if the accountability is not going to be applied, the accountability, by the way, needs to be applied externally, not internally. I don't think any group, I don't care if it's faculty or whoever, can sit and determine whether or not they're good or not.
True, yeah.
Because,
that's another thing too that we haven't gotten into is also the growth of professional organizations and their roles in all this. I mean, like maybe the American Psychological Association, the American Medical Association, or different groups like that.
Yeah, well, of course, the only one I'm really familiar with is the American Bar Association, which has to accredit law schools. And and what they, you know, what you, here's what I found out with a lot of those associations. And nursing's one example. I'll tell you another example that's growing is students going into athletic training, is that a lot of these associations are starting to think not necessarily in terms of quality, but they're starting to think more in terms of keeping down the number of people going into that field. Because, because what that does is that allows salaries to go up. You know, if you create an artificial shortage, then it's going to allow salaries to go up. And I've seen that in a couple of fields.
Well, they also put, you know, they also put these other artificial restrictions. You know, I mean, I you know, every once in a while when I was looking for a place to live, I just ask a realtor, and I said to her, "What neighborhood should I avoid?" And she says, "I can't answer that question, or I'll lose my license."
Right.
And you know, obviously, I'm just, which of course is a logical question, though. You know, what areas should I avoid? And they. So licensing in itself, you know, becomes a way to hit people over the head, and the growth of licensing is also somewhat absurd. When, you know, I have to have a license to be an interior decorator, or I have to have a license to be a.
Once again, those organizations are usually formed by older people who want to restrict the number of people going into it. They like to say, well, you know, we're concerned about the quality. You know, here's the thing. It's the same. Accreditors in a way are licensors. You know, they license the college. They, in other words, they pass on them so that they can get federal money. Yeah. The problem with that, Chris, is that the process, it becomes more as to whether or not you're checking the boxes and complying with process, as to whether or not you're getting results. You know, and this has always disturbed me about higher education, especially public higher education. There is more of a concern about checking the boxes, complying. Did you do, you know, I wrote a blog article not too long ago, and I talked about the fact that these accreditors are more concerned with whether or not there was a faculty member on the landscaping committee than whether they or not Johnny actually learned something when he came out of school. And that's what's happened with a lot of these creditors. It's all about inputs. It's, do you have, I mean, one of the requirements right now still in accreditation is how many books you have in your library. You know, since when did that, you know, that's so outdated. But it's, you know, it's the credentials of your people, and they don't, really a very, very small part of accreditation deals with results. Are your kids actually learning anything? Are your kids getting jobs? You know?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's there's a lot of, there's definitely an issue there. Do you think sports is, what kind of impact has sports had on, you know, the colleges? Because you hear occasionally, you know, these colleges want to de-emphasize athletics, but for most of them, I guess it's a cash cow that they probably don't want to see go away.
Well, you know, it depends. First of all, sports aren't the same.
Yeah.
When you talk about Division I, Power 5, or Power 4, I think there is now with the Pac-10 kind of going under. It is a money maker for them. But, you know, if you look at it, there's over 4,000 colleges and universities in this country, and you're talking about a mere handful when you're talking about the ones that it's actually a big money maker for them. I will say this: I served on the executive council or the executive board for the NCAA Division II.
Yeah,
and I'm a firm believer in sports actually brings a great deal to a college campus, and it's not just the fun you have at homecoming or the spirit or the alumni coming up. It touches on a lot of different things. It is most of the times it's the front porch for a lot of colleges. The guy that gives $10 million to the library may have started out giving $5,000 to the basketball team. You know, that's actually fairly common. But when you talk about Division II, what you find is, first of all, for the most part, students who play athletics have higher GPAs than students who don't. And the reason is because they have more of a structure to their lives. They also have someone that's watching over them every day. if I recruit a kid and I'm turning down 20 other kids to recruit this one kid to come and play on my basketball team, I'm making a heck of an investment of time and everything like that in this kid. I want to make sure this kid learns. I want to make sure he gets to school. Let me tell you a real quick story, because this kind of sums up. I told all my coaches when I was at Bluefield State, I got them all in a room one time, and I said, the very first question I want you to ask any recruit, are you coming here to learn? If they're not coming here to learn, I said, don't recruit them. And when I say coming here to learn, that doesn't mean they all have to have 3 5s. Look, we had some of our best students came out of McDowell County with 2.6, 2.7s, and a lot of it was because of the high school they came out of, But the fact is, the kids had this thirst that they wanted to learn, and so last year, these 5 football players were giving their final speech. And I didn't see it, but I had the dean come over afterwards and said, you should see, these guys were great. And so they walked up to kind of the leader of the group, and he said, I just want to compliment you guys, did a great job. Your speech was organized. It was short. It was precise to the point. Touched every point you had to do. And the kid looked at the student athlete looked at the dean and said, we're here to learn. And if you can get that kind of attitude, sports does add a lot, because it's just another. First of all, we added 10 sports at Bluefield State when I was there. We had 10. We had 13. We had 10, and we did it to help enrollment. But we also made sure that we didn't go overboard like a lot of these schools. Chris, I know private colleges that had 150 kids on their football team. Well, Chris, if you're on offense or defense and you're on the 7 deep chart, the chances are you're probably not going to stick around. First of all, the NCAA limits the amount of time that you can practice to 2 hours. You can't practice 150 kids in 2 hours. You just can't do it. You're going to practice the kids that are going to play, and some of them are going to get some token time in. But so to answer your question, I think you've got to divide it between Division I, big time college, ESPN sports, and then Division II and Division III, where most of these kids come to, and they're not going to the NFL or anything like that. Most of them like playing. We did a survey when I was at West Liberty. 85% of the kids on our athletic teams, and I think this was low, said that if West Liberty did not have our sport, we wouldn't be here. We'll go find some place because we want to play. But the idea to classify every kid as some job. I mean, we had some teams that had 3.5, 3.6 grade point averages. Some of our best students came out of it. So but I think you got to draw the distinction between that and big time.
Oh yeah, I think most did, and I don't know. I would assume also that a lot of that they probably don't. It's probably not demanded that they invest as much time into the sports at that level, but I could be wrong.
Well, I think that first of all, they're limited. But here's the thing. I remember when I was at the board, they wanted to reduce the number of games from 27 to 26 number of basketball games. And this is what you get when you get academia making these decisions. Well, this will give kids more time to be a regular student. That's what they'll do. Let me tell you what, I can guarantee you very few kids, very few student athletes, very few basketball players who didn't play a game on that first Saturday. Very few of them decided, I think I'm going to go out and learn to play the tuba. They didn't do that. They didn't join a club because of that. What they probably did is they probably practiced basketball. And so instead of playing a game, which is what they want to do, we took away that opportunity to do it. So, but there's very limitations on what you got to do it, and the NCAA watches grade point averages and things like that a lot closer. What's killing sports right now is NIL and the transfer portal, because I think Nick Saban was a great example of the story he told, where he lost the national championship. He went in the locker room, and he said, and he started talking about what we accomplished this year, what we're going to do next year. He's talked for 45 minutes. And we said, do you have any questions? He said 80% of his questions were, how much am I going to make next year? That's when he decided that. And he told his story to his wife, and his wife said, I think this is not the kind of game. This is not what we signed up for. And that's why he left coaching. And I think you're starting to see that. I think paying players, look, they backdoor paying players with this NIL. How many of these kids getting NIL money do you see in commercials? I mean, Caitlin Clark, okay, she's going to be in a commercial and you can pay her whatever.
Yeah.
But there's not 4 or 5 kids coming out of high school a year that are, and they're making millions of dollars that you're going to see on an ad or anything like that. So
yeah, I obviously you being in smaller schools, I don't, it's probably, but you hear a lot of these stories of corruption. You'd also hear stories, like, oh, we bought him a candy bar and now we're getting penalized by the NCAA. I mean, come on.
Well, that happened.
Yeah,
that happened. If you gave him an extra T-shirt or something, that would happen. And that was, I mean, some of the things were kind of silly. They were also very subjective. I mean, who decided that when you give a kid an extra T-shirt now that all of a sudden you're over the line and you're buying that kid? I mean, a lot of the rules were kind of silly. But I'll tell you what, the NCAA is like any other regulatory agency. I think they feel sometimes that they have to pass something or they're not doing anything. And all you end up doing is building up those kind of regulations. Hey, Chris, I've got to run.
It's been great having you on here.
Thanks.
And we of course, did you ever have a professor who was better than Harold Lee Vitale?
No, I didn't. No, Harold Vitale, God rest his soul, was the best teacher I ever had. I've heard so many students say the same thing. Of course, for your listeners, he was a teacher both you and I had.
Yeah.
He passed away last year. He left John Marshall over $600,000 for a scholarship fund. I think they're going to actually have the Vitale Scholars. He left $1.5 million to the community. But beyond that, he was just that's dollars and cents. But what he did to affect people's lives was, you just can't measure it in dollars. So it was just a sad passing.
Yeah. He was our high school. Yeah, he was. Well, I think I was the second last class he had, but it was a great high school history teacher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I certainly got into political discussions with him, but why is it that we disagreed a lot, but we were always civil? I said I need to do that with other people in my adult life now, which I can't seem to do.
But Gene, once again, he was a high school government teacher and history teacher. I don't really know his politics, and I've known him for 50 years. And I got a kind of inkling. I think he's probably more of a pragmatist than anything else.
Yeah.
But because I don't think he was dogmatic about anything. But I think a lot of times he just liked to stir up conversation.
I was very opinionated in high school, and when it got to FDR, there was definitely a disagreement there. I said no. I was already hating FDR when I was in high school after. Yeah. And of course, having parents who both thought that he was God, and my grandparents thought that he was God too.
I'm living in Tennessee now, and my electric bills are really low from the TVA, so I can't say anything about that right now.
Okay, yeah, well, it's been great having you here.
Great, Chris.
We can find you at RobinCapehart.com.
Go RobinCapehart.com, and I have a Substack blog, which is RobinCapehart.substack.com, and invite people to come in and read it. My Substack is called At a Slight Angle, and it comes from the fact that there was a speech given about the purposes of college was to look at society at a slight angle. And my take on it is I think it's time for society to start looking at colleges and universities at a slight angle. So.
Yes, well, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, go check out my Substack, go buy my novel Escape from the Village. I'm Chris Baker. Thank you, Robin Capehart. We're out.
Thanks, Chris.